Feeling brave tonight? How brave? Brave enough to do battle with hideous monsters, Brave enough to sneak around dead castles in the dark and chance be the next victim of the Gauntlet video games. Multi-voice reviewer, Gauntlet video games. That is true, folks. My next review is a quest-based fantasy video game. Sometimes I get hair on my mouth. But you know, this is what happens. Every time when you become a wizard, you get old so fast. Kind of like what happened to Tim Allen when he is chosen to become Santa Claus. Let's see what I can do here.
That's better. Game Insane. That means I'm going to be reviewing a game this time, ladies and gentlemen. And the review I'm going to be talking about is, of course, the Gauntlet video games. Now, first off, a little history. Thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the series of the Lord of the Rings books. Yeah, that's right. Back then when I watched the Lord of the Rings movies, I wanted to buy the books, but my grandma told me that she already has them. I was like, really? How? And then she showed me her old library where she kept all the books. And she bought these books way back in these books were published back in 1973. So, these things are very old, although the back looks kind of worn out. But of course, I heard everybody said they had a hard time trying to get the books out. So, it's a little fragile and sort of an antique. But as you can see, I have J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, Two Towers, and Return of the King. And it had really old and interesting artwork back then. And I also heard all the histories about Lord of the Rings and all that. Haven't seen the animated movies of the Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. I haven't seen the movie yet. Haven't seen The Hobbit. But I still have the Lord of the Rings movies. And I remember I did do a review of Lord of the Rings years and years ago. And thanks to the Lord of the Rings, one game creator who goes by the name of Gary Gygax. That's right, Gary Gygax, the same guy who made the famous role-playing game ever made, Dungeons and Dragons. Now, to tell you the truth, folks, it's my Lord of the Rings chariot, and as you can see, Gandalf is on it. Gandalf is my favorite character on Lord of the Rings. You shall not pass! Anyway, and yeah, for those of you who are going to be telling me that I hear all the news and all the stories. Man, who'd have thought about me wearing a leather jacket? It's getting kind of hot here. Yeah. I'll wear it when it gets cold outside. Since fall's coming anyway. That's better. Anyway, folks, yeah, I heard. I saw that one movie called Mages and Monsters. I heard about the Dark Dungeon movie and the comic book based from it. Back then, a lot of people used to say that Dungeons and Dragons are the kind of games that the Satan worshippers starts playing. You know, it's just the same kind of complaint that everybody protests against. They protest against jazz, they protest against rock and roll, they protest against Harry Potter, they protest against comic books back in the 50s because they believed that comic books were the cause of juvenile delinquency. Yeah, well, I read comic books all my life and it doesn't make me a juvenile delinquent. It made me become a die-hard fan to superheroes. Now, I heard my grandma gave my dad a Dungeons and Dragons book, and he was a dungeon master. But I heard a lot of people had one excuse to play Dungeons and Dragons, because that's one thing they need to do, so they can smoke some pot and get high while playing Dungeons and Dragons. But there are some Dungeons and Dragons players who don't need pot. Heck, with my autistic brain, my imagination is far better than any pothead can think of. Go figure, huh? But I always have these Dungeons and Dragons dice. I always keep these things with me because they're mal precious. Mal preciouses. What just happened? 15. Not bad. Anyway, when Dungeons and Dragons got so popular, one game designer named Howard, now I forgot his last name, but he decided to create a game that is similar to Dungeons and Dragons. And the game that he made is none other than, this is Harold here. He was the one who created the game and decided to make an arcade video game that was actually created by Atari, of all things. He created the first arcade of Gauntlet. And of course, now, I haven't played the arcade version of Gauntlet, but believe it or not, I had collected these. It came out in Atari until the early 90s, where now a video game company called Midway owned the rights of Gauntlet. And I found these Midway Arcade Treasures 1 and 2. Gauntlet 1 is on this one, Gauntlet 2 is on this one. Now, I played these Gauntlet games, and of course, my sister joined with me playing these games. And I have to say, they were pretty fun. Except, I have a couple of problems about Gauntlet 1 and Gauntlet 2. These games didn't have an ending. It just kept you playing and playing and playing while going through a huge maze, killing monsters, and finding treasures. But everybody always remember a narrator on the arcade who goes like,
Save keys to open doors and chests. Do not shoot an item. Don't hit the food. Wizards needs food for health.
yeah, I remember the arcade. Until when they decided to have these game transported in the game system. Now, here's one thing I also know about the Gauntlet. The arcade came out in 1985. Same year I was born. I was born in 1985 as well. Yeah, so I'm 34. Whatever. And I'm old. So what? But, when Atari wanted to transport their games into Nintendo, they have them appeared in these cartridges. And you can see its logo, Tengen. Tengen was actually an unlicensed Atari games that you can play with Nintendo until Nintendo decided to sue them for making their games be playable for Nintendo. And then when they made Gauntlet 2, Atari made a deal with Nintendo, and Gauntlet 2 was made for the Nintendo. And now, unlike the arcade games, now in these Gauntlet games, it used to be a 4-player, except for the Nintendo, it was a 2-player. But when they made Gauntlet 2, they had like a 4-player hookup for Nintendo. And you play these characters. You play Thor, the warrior, Thyra, the Valkyrie, Crester, the elf, and Merlin, the wizard in this game. And I always play Merlin the wizard because, well, as you can tell, I have a thing for wizards, and I always like playing wizards. Now, unlike the arcade where the game never ends and you don't go all the way to the finish line, you just keep playing and playing and playing, well, in the when they got it into Nintendo, they made up a villain for it, and the villain's name is Magnus, an evil demon sorcerer. And after the whole arcade deal, they decided to make more games for different systems. Besides Gauntlet 1 and 2 for Nintendo, they made a PC game which is more like an expansion game that you can play on your computer called Gauntlet: The Deep Dungeon. And then when the Atari added again, they made a handheld Link game. If you remember the Atari Link, it's kind of like the Sega Game Gear, and they had some pretty good games, but sadly it just didn't catch on like Nintendo and Sega does. But the Atari Lynx did have a game they made called. Anyway, Atari Lynx made this game, Gauntlet, the third, I think it's called Encounter or something? I don't know. And it was just like the original Gauntlet game. Until when they created a game for the PC again, they made the Final Quest Gauntlet 3. Now, unlike the other Gauntlet games, this one, Gauntlet 3, on this one, you don't play the wizard or Valkyrie or elf anymore. You can play the wizard, but you can also play a nerd, a football player, a samurai, and a ninja. I mean, it was. You play different types of character, and even some that is not exactly medieval related. I'm sure it was pretty fun of its time. And then when Sega came along, the Gauntlet decided to make a fourth Gauntlet game for the Sega Genesis, and I wish I had this game. Because I have a Sega Genesis. Because, you know me, I have a soft spot for Sega. And they made this game, Gauntlet 4 for the Sega Genesis, where you play the usual 4 characters. Until years later, around the 90s, probably 1998, they made an Atari game of Gauntlet Legend. Now, I saw the arcade, and I was thrilled to see it, and I wish they had them in game system. Much to my surprise, they succeeded. Now, the one I showed you is for the PlayStation. I hear not many people didn't like the PlayStation one because the because it was a two-player. It didn't have a four-player hookup on the thing for the PlayStation 1, but I still play it and I beat it because it was a little bit easy. But also but it's not only available on the PlayStation. They had it available for the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64, the design wasn't exactly as good as the PlayStation or the Sega Dreamcast version. The Nintendo 64 version was more of a 3D cube animated with some spikes. I mean, it was a lot. I mean, the Nintendo 64 version was a lot like Legend of Zelda 64, which there is no dialogue, no narrator, just subtitles for you to read, and that's about it. But to me, I always love Gauntlet Legend for the PlayStation because it's my favorite. I don't care what people say. But one thing I do admit, I wish I have a Sega Dreamcast, because one thing I notice about the Sega Dreamcast here, that the graphics and the design was a lot like the arcade. So pretty much, the Sega Dreamcast is a lot like the arcade version. That's why I wish I had a Sega Dreamcast and the game for it, so I could try it. And of course, probably love it. Now, one thing that the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation didn't have that the Sega Dreamcast have now is they had the expansion part where oh yeah, if you want to know the story, well, I'll explain it all to you. It had the expansion to it. I just had to buy the PlayStation. I had to get myself a PlayStation 4 and buy this one, which is my #1 favorite Gauntlet game among all others. And it's, of course, Gauntlet Dark Legacy. I got it for the PlayStation 2, but they also made it for Nintendo GameCube. And also the Xbox. Now, I hear a lot of people say that the Xbox version of Dark Legacy was a lot better than the Super Nintendo and the GameCube. So, sadly, I was more of a PlayStation guy. I never think about having an Xbox. But if I did have an Xbox, this would be the first game I would love to try, among all others. But anyway, folks, the worst one, it was really bad. The worst Gauntlet Dark Legacy port ever made is the Game Boy Advance version. Don't ever buy the Game Boy Advance version. It's not that good. Now, for those of you who wants to know about the Dark Legacy, what's the story here? Well, in an ancient time, my older brother, a greedy young mage named Garm, using the power of the Realm Stones, released a great evil upon the world. This demon, Scorn, broke free of Garm's control.
Fearing the power of the runestones, cast them in the four regions of the four mystical realm and hope that they would never ever be assembled and used against him. No one has dared tried. Until now, where I, Sumner, the sorcerer, and older brother to Garm, summon 4 great heroes, and now 6 great heroes, in order to defeat this forces of evil.
And that's the story. You have to go to different worlds to battle against monsters and battle against Scorn. And of course, now I battle against Scorn, and as you can see here, I made this box where not only that I have Dark Legacy in it, but I also have Gauntlet Legend in this. I decided to put 2 games together sometimes. I'm creative like that. A little known fact, when the game got popular enough and wanted to know more in the story, a writer wrote a novel called Gauntlet Dark Legacy Path of Evil, which I don't have the book, and I wish I have. So probably I might be able to read it. Although sadly I'm not much of a reader. Now you would remember, folks, that when I play the Gauntlet games, I always play the wizard. Every time when I play Gauntlet, I always play
Merlin the Wizard.
Yeah, that's right. I usually put my face in this Merlin's body. Well, I named him Merlin, but you can make up any kind of name you want. And they go by different color and design. I mean, if you want to be a red wizard, he looks like a Viking. If you choose a green wizard, he looks like he's a wizard from the woods. And if you choose a blue one, well, he's medieval. So I like the blue wizard. But when I play Gauntlet Dark Legacy, on Gauntlet Dark Legacy, I also play Fool the Jester. I know, another character I digitally put my face on. He's supposed to be a magical, mystical, green and orange jester who is from the land of dreams. And of course, in the game, this is Scorn, the evil demon. That's what he looks like. And when you battle against Scorn, here is Sumner, the sorcerer, who... Now, if you beat the game, you can play him. You just gotta know a certain code. And then you beat against Garm. Of course, I need to go through the booklets. As you can see in the game here, here's the 3 characters you can choose. Oh, if you choose yellow, you would look Egyptian. Anyway, here are the main ones. You have a warrior, Valkyrie, wizard, and archer. They decided to call her Archer instead of elf. And of course, here is Sumner. But when I played Dark Legacy, you choose these new characters if you like. And here's one of my characters I play, the Jester. You also play the dwarf, the knight, and the sorceress. Why did they make the sorceress so buxom? I don't get it. I think it's really interesting, though. You can get more characters if you go through bonus levels. Now, they always have these bonus levels where they give you a timer, and you have to collect all the coins before the timer runs out. And here are these different characters you can collect. You can get on your collection. You can get a tigress, an ogre. Imagine that. If you unlock the ogre character, you can name him Shrek. A hyena. Very funny animals. A unicorn. Very mystical, I might say. A Medusa. A falcon. A minotaur. And a jackal. From Egyptian legends. Now, of course, what I have here is I have a list of other characters that you can unlock. Depends on the cheat codes that you got, that you can do. Now, I don't want to give everything away here, but you can play either a chicken, which is pretty funny because you go around shooting explosive eggs and breathe fire at them. You can also play an alien, cap head, just a big head with a pencil drawing body. Death, an evil wizard, which you can play the game as Garm, a footballer, a happy face, an ice dwarf, and you can also play as Garm, dressing up in his tortured robe, because Scorn tortured Garm when he broke free of his control. Well, others just call it a lech. A lech is like an undead sorcerer. Also, you can be a ninja, a nude Valkyrie, kids, an ogre samurai, a feral, a punk with a mohawk, a rat, like a rat warrior, Roman soldier, S&M dwarf, a schoolgirl, a special warrior, a waitress, a man with a bat, baseball bat, bald man with a bat, a man with a mace, a man with a skull mace, and also Sumner. Yeah, you can play the powerful sorcerer, the one who's in charge, the one who summons all of us. And that's Gauntlet Dark Legacy for you. Take it from me, folks. I don't care if the PlayStation 2 version is not that good. To me, it's a lot more fun and very addicting to me. I mean, if I ever want to play Gauntlet, this is the one I prefer to play the most, compared to all the other Gauntlets. Now, moving right along, Midway also went out of business all of a sudden, and they made a deal with Eidos to make a Nintendo SD game, but sadly it was canceled, and it was Gauntlet SD, I mean DS, Gauntlet DS, and as you can see, they made the wizard a woman. Imagine that. And now in 2014 for PlayStation 4, they made a brand new Gauntlet game. And of course, Warner Brothers made a deal with Midway to own all their games. And that's when they made the new Gauntlet game. Now, I haven't played this game, and I wish I had a PlayStation 4 it works. And if I have a PlayStation 4, I would definitely buy this game and play it and enjoy it myself. And they also said that you had to go to the SDL online shop and unlock the Necromancer. Now, a Necromancer is a sorcerer who specializes on raising the dead. sort of a special power called necromancy. Now, one thing I almost forgot. Back in 2005, there was another Gauntlet game they made, and sadly, it didn't go too well. And it was Gauntlet 7 Sorrows. I played it, and it's not good. I mean, if I had to choose which Gauntlet game is not all that good, I have to say this is the worst. Well, I wouldn't say worse. It's just plain bad. This game is really bad. Well, this is my review to Gauntlet, ladies and gentlemen. And oh yeah. Now I don't have that many Dungeons and Dragons games, folks, but I do have this, and I think you might find this very interesting. Clue Dungeons and Dragons. This one, a archmage gets murdered, and it's up to you to figure out who killed him and where and with what, and you play these D&D characters to solve the crime. Interesting. Now, if any of you want me to review Dungeons & Dragons, well, we'll see. I got a lot to do, and if I ever have a chance to come around to review Dungeons & Dragons, I'll let you guys know. Well, right now I want to focus more on the Gauntlet games and tell you how much I love them. To me, folks, the best is Gauntlet Dark Legacy, the worst is 7 Sorrows. So if any of you love my review of Gauntlet, please leave a comment down below, hit like, and subscribe for more of my reviews. As for me, the game is on. Imagine that. Wait a minute. 17.